I'm so excited to have our special guest today, Dr. Dora Alvarez, one of our pediatric residents at Stanford, to join us and co-present with me. So our objectives today are to have you guys at the end of this session to be able to describe the 4 building blocks of hope, apply hope-based principles in different types of clinical encounters, and to be able to establish a plan to implement hope in your local clinical settings. Before we get started, I'd like to just get a sense of who's in the room with the Zoom poll. We're primarily physicians, nurse practitioners, and physician's assistants, some healthcare administrators, and some folks that fit into other categories. So first, we're going to start with an overview of hope and strengths-based principles that Dr. Alvarez is going to lead us through.
Awesome. Thank you everyone for being here. So I wanted to take time to explain a little bit about the Health Outcomes and Positive Experiences Framework, or HOPE. It basically brings together the well-known concepts of health and positive experiences to create a common language. And it grounds first in the definition of health by the WHO that really focuses on a holistic biopsychosocial view of health to include a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely just the absence of disease or infirmity. We also integrate a life course lens, which we might also be familiar with. And we can consider common positive experiences as one grows and develops, from initial attachment to parents and caregivers to emergence of independence during adolescence to mastery. HOPE creates a common language that honors the science we know behind health and positive experiences. So most people are already familiar with adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences are categorized into 3 types: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And we know from the literature that ACEs can increase the risk for several diseases and other detrimental effects, such as coronary heart disease, asthma, depression, heavy drinking, and not graduating high school. However, these 3 categories of abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction don't really cover community or societal factors that can also increase toxic stress. Different kinds of societal factors include things like poverty, institutional racism, historical trauma, war and migration, and also neighborhood effects. So looking at this a slightly different way, we can consider the community and societal factors that contribute to toxic stress and ACEs as traditionally defined as a pair of ACEs. Adverse childhood experiences don't come out of thin air, as we know. They are rooted in adverse community environments that also contribute to the toxic stress. Addressing adverse childhood experiences without addressing the adverse community environments kind of makes adverse childhood experiences an individual problem. In doing so, we can potentially place the responsibility on the marginalized communities to fix themselves. And then we also are missing a critical opportunity to decrease toxic stress and promote healing in the community. One researcher, Wendy Ellis at GWU, conceptualized a pair of ACEs. So by being able to ground in both sets of ACEs, both childhood experiences and community environments, kind of sets us up well for enacting hope in our work. Grounding in health equity and anti-racist practice. So the way that go ahead, Dr. Floyd.
So we studied positive childhood experiences, or PCEs, in a similar way to the way that ACEs are studied. And they added questions about positive childhood experiences to the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factors study. And they also asked about ACEs. They correlated these to adult mental health and found that for those with 4 or more ACEs, as PCE scores increases, it decreased the rates of depression or poor mental health. So positive childhood experiences mitigate the effects of adverse childhood experiences. So now, just as ACEs are categorized, PCEs are categorized into 4 building blocks, which we call the 4 building blocks of hope. The first, relationships, are secure, warm attachments and sustained relationships with parents, other adults, and peers. Safe, equitable environments are safe, stable homes with access to adequate nutrition and sleep. high quality learning opportunities and opportunities for play and physical activity and access to medical care. Social and civic engagement is involvement in social institutions and environments, fun and joy and activities with others, a feeling of success and accomplishment, and then pride and cultural traditions and a sense of value. Opportunities for emotional growth is building self regulation, executive function skills, really having positive character traits, self awareness, and social cognition, and a productive response to challenges. So the AAP also recommends looking at family protective factors, and they recommend the strengthening families protective factors as one of the two models to use. So we're going to review that too. So parental resilience is the ability to function well under stress in general and to be able to parent well in times of stress. Social connections are to friends and supportive relationships, and these are reciprocal relationships, not one sided ones. Knowledge of parenting and child development is appropriate developmental expectations, recognizing and responding to your children's specific developmentally appropriate needs. Concrete supports are having basic needs and beyond met. And if you don't have those things, knowing where to go to get them. And then social and emotional competence of children is parenting that fosters secure attachment, encourages and reinforces social skills, and really produces children with age appropriate self regulation and an ability to maintain and support positive relationships. In that same vein, the AAP recommends engaging with families in a strength based way. They say identify strengths, give positive feedback, and use those things together for shared decision making. This really helps families to see the strengths within themselves and tap into their own agency. So, we're going to put all of this together by looking at a tale of two depression screens. I want you guys to know that this is reviewing two depression screens that were submitted electronically, and these videos were edited for length. So, discussion of the suicidality questions is not pictured. So, we'll play the first one. Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Floyd, one of the pediatricians. Good morning. I need to go over your postpartum depression screen results with you. Thank you so much for completing the screener. No problem. So it looks like you're struggling a bit, having little interest or pleasure in doing things. You're feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, not falling asleep or sleeping too much, not having enough energy, poor appetite, feeling bad about yourself, not being able to concentrate, moving around so much that other people have noticed. Um, does that seem like it agree with how you feel?
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so we have several resources for moms with postpartum depression. We can refer you to a home visitor who can come to your house, get to know you, and provide support. She also can meet you in the community if you don't want her at your house. And then we have therapists as well, which is somebody you can talk to one on one about how you're feeling and how to cope. Which would you prefer?
Probably the home visit. I don't really feel like getting out very much lately.
Great. So I'll put in that referral. You should hear from somebody in the next week.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any questions?
No, I don't think I have anything.
Okay, wonderful. We'll see you in clinic next week to check on your little girl's weight.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, bye bye. Okay, so that was video one. Now we'll move on to video number two. Hi, good morning. I'm Dr. Floyd, one of the pediatricians. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. How are you? Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. I know it's been a little over 3 or 4 days since I last saw you guys. And how's baby doing?
She's doing okay. She's kind of love when she makes her little faces and just it brings me joy sometimes to see that.
That it does. It sounds like getting to know her is going well.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have any questions or concerns today?
Mm, not really. Not really feeling myself lately, but besides that, good. I thought that's just normal new mom feeling.
You know, it is really common for moms to have at least a little bit of baby blues after having a new baby. So the purpose of our visit today is actually to talk about your postpartum depression screen. But first, it sounds like you already know you're struggling a little bit.
Yeah.
And how's dad adjusting?
He's doing okay. Every day he does a little more and is a little more involved, but he doesn't have a lot of experience around babies. So
Well, I'm glad he's getting some now. Do you guys have other support locally?
we've had some people that have been in the house the last couple days. A sister and then an aunt and a cousin. Sometimes it's been good to have them. Sometimes it's not been because you just kind of want peace and quiet, and you can't get that with all these people in the house.
Yeah, I bet. But it does sound like they're able to help and support you around the baby when they're around.
Yeah.
Yeah. I encourage you to set boundaries when you need that quiet time, but let them help you.
Yeah.
So I want to go over your results from your postpartum depression screen just to make sure that this agrees with how you're feeling so that we can follow the score over time while you're working with your home visitor. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So looking at the screener, you answered nearly every question saying that you were struggling nearly every day with little pleasure or interest in doing things, feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, not sleeping well, feeling tired or having little energy. Are you still feeling that way?
Yeah.
So, Mama, this does look like you're struggling with postpartum depression. But what I'm really happy to hear is that you're open to having a home visitor. Would love that you have support at home because that extra support is really, really helpful. Is there anything else that we can do to support you between now and the next time we see you in clinic?
No.
Okay, perfect. So I'll see you guys in a week just to check up on your little girl's weight, and you should hear from the home visitor in about a week. If you don't, please give us a call at the clinic.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day. All right. So now we're going to place you all into random breakout groups of 5 to 7 folks per group. And in your groups for 5 minutes, you guys are going to compare and contrast the two depression screens and discuss what building blocks you saw used and what strength-based principles you saw used. So drilling down on those relationships and that she has all of those people encircled around her as sources of strength. And what you drilled into right there is that when we start with strengths, that it really does open up that encounter and make the family and client and patient feel more comfortable so that when you do have to have uncomfortable conversations, that it's like, okay, I'm relaxed and I can feel comfortable discussing uncomfortable conversations, right? It's not that I have to have a conversation from a negative perspective from the beginning without kind of a warm up. So now we're going to integrate all of this in a case. So Dr. Alvarez is going to share a difficult case that came to our door at clinic. First, though, I'm going to kind of go over the way that we think about how to use hope and strength-based principles for cases. So kind of in line with AAP strengths-based engagement recommendations, we really start by identifying and validating strengths with the family, just because it's particularly powerful as families are often blamed for situations like poverty that aren't within their control. Then we utilize hope building blocks to bolster existing strengths, kind of like you saw with that other case where we talked about relationships for a while. Then we offer hope building blocks to bolster areas of relative weakness. So, Dr. Alvarez.
Great. So now it's going to be time to try to find some hope in this real life clinic case. The patient was 11 years old. He was a boy with learning difficulties, and he was coming in for his well child check with his mother. As we walked into the room, the mom and the patient barely look up to us. They are kind of just glued to their phone. And initially, I was kind of annoyed because we had to ask them kind of a few different times to put the phone down. And prior to entering the room, just doing some chart review on the patient, I was a little bit stressed just knowing that there was going to be a lot of challenges that our team would need to address or could potentially need to address during that visit. To give you a little bit of background, the family had a history of chronic housing insecurity. They oftentimes moved maybe 3-4 times a year in the time that we knew them. Mom was a survivor of interpersonal violence multiple times and with different partners, unfortunately. The boy himself had a history of bullying. He did require therapy in the past, and no contact from either his father or his other brother's fathers. The mom was an undocumented immigrant, which negatively affected their economic security. And then all three of the children in the family had special healthcare needs or learning needs. Um, his younger brother likely had ADHD, but we really hadn't been able to fully assess just given the time that they moved very frequently. Um, so at this visit, when we asked mom what she was concerned about, it kind of boiled down to a few things. So economic security, she was recently laid off. She was struggling emotionally herself after a recent miscarriage and separation from her partner after interpersonal violence. She seemed worried about this patient's school progress since he seemed to be having more trouble with his work and distance learning due to COVID and less support from his IEP. And then what she really wants is kind of support to handle the stresses that they're dealing with in the setting of the pandemic. Let's see. So those are kind of the current challenges and concerns. And then when we kind of dug a little bit deeper when talking with mom, she explained that with the increased time that she had and how stressed her and the kids were with everything going on, she wanted to spend fun time with them. She thought this would help their stress. And the reason that they were actually staring at their phone when we entered the room is because they were playing Pokemon Go as a family. They were walking over 13 kilometers a week, actually. Um, Also, delving into the school concerns, mom had already asked for an IEP meeting with the school to discuss the son's progress. And what she really wanted from us was confirmation of what questions to ask and some guidance around that. She wanted therapy for her kids as well. But for the first time, she was open for therapy for herself as well, acknowledging that she needed to heal as well from her past trauma. So she also was able to update us on the current status of, the many challenges that we have recounted. They're stably housed in a studio apartment, though it's quite small. Her U visa application had been received and acknowledged, and she had already applied for additional benefits. Her other children's asthma, cerebral palsy, and epilepsy are all doing well, and they're well controlled. And she mentioned that she's still forgot to bring the Vanderbilt back for ADHD assessment from her younger son's teacher.
Wow, thanks, Dr. Alvarez. So that's a lot, right? So now it's your turn. So you guys are going to help us figure out what strengths this family has, what hope building blocks they are already using, and what hope building blocks we can use to address their concerns. So we're going to flip screens and use poll everywhere. So you can either use text or you can respond at poll EV at this website. And first, you guys are going to respond, answer this first question with what strengths this family has. And I think other people agree with you because I'm seeing concrete supports come in. Social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development. Great. So it looks like parental resilience, concrete supports, and knowledge of parenting and child development are in the lead. All right, so let's go to the next question. What building blocks is the family already using? So I'm seeing relationships and opportunities for emotional growth, a little bit of safe and equitable environment, some social and civic engagement. All right, so it looks like relationships and opportunities for emotional growth are in the lead. And safe and equitable environments and social and civic engagement are tied for last. All right, now mom is saying that she wants resources to address their stresses currently. She's also wanting to make sure that she has the right questions to ask the school when she goes to her child's IEP meeting. So what building blocks might we give her to address her concerns in a hope-informed manner? And so when I usually do this, I think about what domain I would give resources from. So I'm seeing safe and equitable environment. So those might be things about places to go, social and civic engagement. So those also might be places to engage, opportunities for emotional growth. That might be therapy, relationships. Those might be new relationships to build. All right, so I'm seeing most safe and equitable environments, and then social and civic engagement and emotional growth, and then relationships last. All right, thanks, guys. So now let's talk it through over here. So what I noted, or what we noted during our visit, was, as we talked about before, it's really easy to get overwhelmed with the family's challenges. And we knew this family well, right? And as Dora said, we were kind of overwhelmed walking into the room, and that can take you to a certain headspace when you start to engage with the family. So when we start by talking about their strengths, that's a good way for us as providers too, to help us to stay in a positive mind frame and to take a moment to reframe what we're seeing in a strength-based and hope-informed way. So for this mom, yes, she's very resilient. But as we talk about resilience, it's important to ground in the fact that if someone's resilient, their situation has required them to be resilient. So it's important to be trauma informed as we think about that. Also, mom, like y'all said, she's resilient. She's super resourceful. She figured out most of this stuff on her own. And all I really had to do was tell her the questions that you're planning to ask them. Those are the right ones. Good job. Way to go. And she knew exactly what to do for her kids to help them heal from the stress that they're experiencing. I would have told her, get outside, spend time together, have fun. And she already knew that. You guys also latched on to the fact that she was promoting the social and emotional competence of her children by the way that she was parenting during this time. Additionally, the fact that she was spending that time with her kids, that's also promoting social connections. One of the things that we've been working on with this mom over the course of years was trying to give her more social connections with people outside of her home, which is something hopefully we'll be able to, Dr. Alvarez and I will be able to continue to work on over time. So you guys also were all over the fact that they were building relationships by spending that time together outside. And mom was giving her kids access to safe, equitable environments by keeping them housed. Yes, their house is small, but for a family that's been chronically homeless, for them to be stably housed, if we look at it in a hope-informed manner, that's still good. That's an incremental gain, so I'll take it. She found safe parks for them in a neighborhood that's not the greatest. So again, this mom's going above and beyond, and that's amazing. You guys also noted the fact that mom is trying to help her children have opportunities for emotional growth as well. And then as we start to think about what we can do to address this family's concerns in a hope-informed manner, what we did in this visit was we really leaned into opportunities for future engagement. Because mom was finally ready to get therapy for herself, we focused on one resource, really because of that. So what we did was gave mom a therapy referral for her and for her boys. And then we also decided that since that was kind of where her head was at, we would give her a support group for herself, for an IPD support group for survivors, and a Boys and Girls Club information for the boys. And that's where we stopped, just because of the time that we're in and things being so stressful. However, giving her any of those other building blocks would have been perfectly fine. And so one of the things that was so amazing about this visit was I've known this family for now 6 years. And at every encounter, I've tried to lean in with mom about whether or not she's ready for therapy. And I've gotten summarily shut down within a matter of seconds. Like, I don't even get to finish the sentence well. And she's like, Dr. Floyd, no. Dr. Floyd, no. And at this visit, she was like, I think my kids need to go back to therapy. I think I do too. I need therapy. And I mean, it was so unbelievably amazing. Just because I didn't even think at this visit to ask, because she'd shut me down so many times. And just because of kind of where she was in her life. And I think because of the fact that we'd been leading with strengths for so long, she was able to say, like, oh, yeah, I'm ready. So it was a really awesome visit for that reason. So now we want to spend the remainder of our time together, allowing you guys to go into a breakout room to think about how you might implement this in your work. So we're going to open up role specific breakout rooms so that you can talk about how you would imagine fitting hope into your work in healthcare. And then at the end of that 15 minutes, maybe for the last 5 minutes, I'd like you to spend time coming up with your own personalized SMART aim for your first step to hope informed practice. And then we'll come back together. And Dr. Alvarez will share with us some of her personal reflections from putting hope into practice in her personal practice. And we'll have questions. And then that's how we'll finish up. So often in healthcare, we're so worried about efficiency. So if you're thinking about trying to both be efficient and be compassionate, I think it makes it where it's more realistic, because we're always fighting how to make things happen in a way that's efficient because folks are worried about the bottom line. So question in the chat box is, how do you suggest integrating PCEs and HOPE into ACEs screenings by providers? This is actually something we're starting to try to work on in our practice. So there's a couple of different ways. So what we're trying to do is basically use this as a way that we introduce screening. So what we've been testing out is that before we introduce any screen, that we are screening for strengths or that we are introducing hope, so that we're talking about relationships or safe, equitable environments or emotional growth or engagement with the family before we talk about social determinants of health screening or before we would talk about ACEs screening, though we're not screening for ACEs in our practice. The other thing that we're looking at is how we would screen specifically for strengths. So we're testing out different types of screeners. So we're going to test out the Strengthening Families Protective Factor survey. And there's another survey that we're thinking about adapting that hasn't been normed in Spanish speaking populations or in pediatrics. So those are things that we're thinking about. But in general, the idea is that you want to make sure that there's some way that you're identifying something positive or identifying strengths at the same time that you're identifying those ACEs. The challenge is that there are not a lot of the tools that you would use to identify resilience. They tend to be a little on the longer side. And for a lot of practices, we're already screening for so many things that from a practical standpoint, then you're like, I'm going to give the family a pile of paper this big. And then you worry about screen fatigue. So I don't have a great practical answer for you, because I haven't figured it out yet in terms of what will work in the real world. This is also where starting with a conversation as part of a screening assessment is so very important. And not taking it where the screen is what you're doing, right? So often we get so caught up in what screen are you using? What's the best screener? When really the part that's most important is the screening encounter, the conversation that happens before you talk about the screening results, why the person is being screened, what's going to happen if they tell you the actual truth on those screening questions. That's what's more important than the actual screener that's used. Um, and there's some evidence that when screens are done on paper or online, folks may be more truthful than if you are asking the screening questions of a person in person. In practice, what folks often find is that when you're asking screening questions in the context of a conversation or it's in the context of a trusted relationship, however, you often are more likely to actually get the truth. It sounds like you guys all had amazing conversations. I think this is a really good time to flip And I want to invite Dr. Alvarez to share some local perspectives about what it's been like to do this locally and learn from her a little bit.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. I loved hearing from everyone's perspective. I think for me, kind of bringing hope into screenings and business in general, particularly when you're working with marginalized or underserved communities, kind of gives a good opportunity for me as a provider to shift away from trying to learn what makes kids unhealthy to what keeps kids healthy. As medical trainees, as we briefly just mentioned, we're kind of always looking for how to diagnose medical problems and issues and deficits and conditions. And so finding the hope and the positivity in the room has definitely kind of been a really great change, I think. It's an opportunity as well, I think, to see families more holistically, to see like what kind of relationships they're trying to develop, to see what kind of environments they're trying to create for the family despite any type of circumstance that has been given to them. And depending on the family, I think it can really be helpful for them to hear from the medical provider, be it the physician or the social worker, or just someone who has some kind of power in the clinical setting to acknowledge all the work that they've been doing. Compared to not using a hope-based screen, which I definitely have even during my training, I think stuff can feel very negative, very overwhelming, kind of leave the room downtrodden when you take into account like all the different kinds of systemic trauma that is inflicted on families, especially when you know them like on a personal basis. But having the hope perspective can create room for at least a positive ending, some kind of uplifting story, something you can share with the family that's positive, which also really helps, I think, a provider's mental health and well-being. And I think lastly, instead of kind of just going over all the challenges that people face and reminding them again and again about the injustices in their life or the struggles in their life, being able to remind them of the strengths that they already possess and then strengths that they might next achieve, I think has been like a very important part of my training in the primary care setting. So overall, I've been really positively impressed by how nice it is to be a provider doing a hope-based screening. And it feels that families are also really appreciative of it as well.
Dr. Alvarez, would you mind sharing it a little bit about how you've used this with adolescents and treating anxiety and depression, particularly the kiddos we're working with that are on medication?
Yeah, definitely. I think the last physician kind of said something similar where you can, even when people are being really vulnerable and sharing things that they're struggling with, if you can highlight the bravery in that and the connection that they felt with the parent in the room to be able to voice that as well, or the connection that they're creating with yourself as a provider, highlighting that, I think, in the setting of mental health issues, especially like initiating a medication, for instance, I think has a lot of benefits. Like one, you kind of take the pressure off of them. You tell them that like not everything is bad, like you're doing really great things. And then also it kind of builds that relationship that you're going to need to have, obviously, with them, like both as a medication management perspective and then also to monitor their symptoms. So I think that has been like particularly helpful situation.
Yeah, I have to second that, and I just want to compliment Dr. Alvarez because this is not something I thought of. She came out of the room and she was like, "Yeah, I was talking about how we're building a relationship as a medical team with her and her family." And then she did such a good job of building the relationship between her and her mom, and she was so bold in telling us this. And so I just want to highlight the fact that even outside of screening, it's very natural to be able to integrate this because the language is so accessible. And so being able to experiment with utilizing this in all kinds of clinical encounters with the residents has also been such an amazing learning experience for me, both as an educator and just as a provider. We are now just about at time. So just 3 quick take-home points. Hope-informed care, as all of you guys have noticed, can really be layered into any of your existing processes. This also can support recovery from toxic stress. And I truly believe that hope-informed care can spark joy for our patients, our families, and for all of us in our work. Thank you so much for your time and attention. We have a few minutes left. so that if you guys have any questions, Dr. Alvarez and I would love to just stick around to answer any questions that y'all may have. And then otherwise, you guys, please take some time to think about your SMART aims so y'all can do this in your clinical settings. It's been so unbelievably amazing for us to do in our work, and I wish the same for everyone.